Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-hosts Shamika Michelle and Wilfred Riley. And our guest this week is Rebekah Koffler. She is a former DIA intelligence officer and author of the book Putins Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. Rebekah, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Charles and everyone. Pleasure to be here.
So we want to talk about your book and all things Russia and some foreign policy, and obviously a woman working in an intelligence agency. All that stuff may come up. But I guess we could talk. Generally, you start off talking about why somebody wrote the book. We know it's Putin. You want to give them some inside story. But I want to start off by talking. First, I want to apologize, not on my behalf. I want to apologize for Will, because Will will probably make some bad communist jokes during the course of the show. And don't put it on me. It's Will's fault. And but no, let's talk about, because you didn't come to America until you were an adult. So you grew up in Russia, well, actually in the former Soviet Union at the time when you were a child. So talk a bit about your background and growing up even before you came to America.
Sure. So I was born and raised behind the Iron Curtain in the country that no longer exists. It was called the Soviet Union, or U.S.S.R. Specifically, I was born in Kazakhstan. Imagine that. Kazakhstan is actually in the news right now, so we could even talk about that. My parents always encouraged me to eventually go to America. Ever since I was a little girl, I remember being told that I need to learn English and get good grades in school and go to a university in Moscow. So eventually I would end up in America, the land of freedom and justice and opportunity. I have no idea how my parents knew about America because we're from a small town, but they did. So in 1989, it did happen. I came to America.
Wow. That's interesting. Your parents, from a small town, having that wish for you. Panel, Will,
Yes.
Shamika, is there anything you all want to add specific about the Iron Curtain before we get to intelligence in the book?
Well, I would just say, as a child, I remember feeling like, okay, Russia is America's enemy. I didn't know anything at the time about any other, countries that we may need to look out for, China or Afghanistan or, North Korea. I just remember being afraid of Russia and just feeling like, oh my God, if we ever go to war, it's going to be with them. And as an adult, I don't think that I had that thought that they were really still on the radar. And that's probably just me being ignorant, because as reading your book, I'm like, wow, those concerns as a child were valid. And it seems that we still need to be concerned about Russia.
Absolutely. Funny you should mention this, Shamika. I also grew up with a tremendous fear of America because the communist authorities, unleashed propaganda every day, anti-American propaganda, how, Americans want a war with Russia. And literally, like, as a child, you get very scared and you think it's real. And not only as a child, most Russian people were afraid. And I remember, looking up in the sky, and every time like an airplane would fly, I thought, oh my goodness, there could be a war. And of course, at school, when I was a student at regular school, we had regular drills where literally at the sound of the alarm, we were supposed to run out, as far as possible away from the school and hide. Oh, and also we were given these, I don't know what you call those things, like a big, like a mask with a thing, like a trunk of the of an elephant. We would put them on, flip them on, and I guess it's supposed to like protect you from biological or
Yes.
chemical attack or something, so we did all that stuff. That is real. It's interesting that both sides had pretty much the same experience.
Yeah, I mean, my older cousins actually in Chicago and the Midwest went through similar drills. In America, people usually hid under desks or in sort of like cellars rather than fleeing the building. Of course, none of this is going to do any good if the other side drops a nuclear weapon on your city. You're just going to be dead in the basement. But I mean, nonetheless, this was a big part of life in the USA and the USSR. I mean, preparing for sort of the existential enemy. This isn't really so much a question, this first line, but obviously the collapse of the Cold War on both sides and the collapse of the Soviet Union is one of the great events of, I mean, recent past history. And to some extent it's downplayed because so much of the American intellectual class was cheering for the Russians. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with it. I mean, there are an extraordinarily high percentage of Marxists in our academy and so on. So you had our generals and then the ordinary, almost too far to the right Americans, the John Birch block of the country. And then you had many people that thought of communism as sort of the beautiful dream and hoped it would succeed. My question to a former Soviet kind of comes down the middle between those two. What was day-to-day life like in the USSR? I mean, were you a Russian patriot in the sense that I suppose I'm an American patriot? Were there US Soviet flags everywhere? And did people expect the 5-year plan to work? What was it like?
So because my parents did not agree with the system, we were sort of, kind of like closeted anti-communist, if you will. We listened to Voice of America and Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe. That was, they were banned, obviously, so we had to do it surreptitiously. My mom always would tell us, me and my sister, do not believe everything that you hear on TV, on radio. Do not believe everything that your teachers are telling you, and do not share, your family views with anybody, because it was dangerous, obviously, because the Communist Party was always on the lookout, for those who disagreed with it. And, if somebody overheard you being, critical of the authorities, you would have a problem, you could lose a job, et cetera, et cetera. So from that standpoint, we had to lead sort of a double life, and it's especially like as a child, it's very difficult to reconcile that when your parents say everything, don't believe anything that you hear, so you kind of get confused. But I don't know about you all, but I see that in my children, that sometimes my children think that we, the parents, are wrong and the teachers are right. So the same way, there were times when I thought, oh, my parents are wrong, and I would tell the teacher, what they said, and they would be called to school, to talk about that. So but in this respect, given what's going on right now in America, it's very ironic that I tell the same thing to my children, because I personally disagree with what's going on, with the political correctness, with the whole, government control. There's certain things that we can't say anymore. So I tell my children, and we are sort of, I really love capitalism. I love America. I hate, socialism, because I don't think Americans understand what it really is, and the leftist. And so I tell my children to be very careful, sharing their views, because we're in an area where there are a lot of, leftists. And so it's funny how it's chasing me, this whole socialism business. 30 years, after I've fled, it's now all over again, and I really do not like that.
But to Will's question, a little more drill down is, so that was what was happening, your family dynamic. But as you went to school and as you went through the streets and as you went to the market, were most people like patriotic, or were they, going through the motions because it would be better for their health to be patriotic? Was it real, or was it just, or did people just keep their heads down?
So yes, so there were obviously there were different kinds of people, right? There was a small segment of the society, and typically they were either like Communist Party members, or those who occupied the ruling class effectively, right? And those who were aspiring to be communists, right? At every job, every university, there would be people like that. And so, but the majority of people really disagreed, not actively, but they understood that the system is a sham, and we were mocking the system, like, but quietly, only sharing it with the people whom you trusted, and we would make jokes about it. So when the authorities, would tell us that, oh, capitalism is, wrong, there's oppression, and, there's exploitation, the capitalists exploit poor people and oppress minorities, including Black Americans, we would say, especially people who hear the truth on Voice of America and other media that you could get, which was not really readily available. You had to really go into trouble to be able to get that information. So we would joke around and say, yeah, capitalism is, and the Soviets would say, it's a stagnating system. It's like it's a deteriorating system, capitalism. And we would joke around and we would say, yeah, it's capitalism is rotting, but it surely smells very nicely. Because, like, we would see occasionally, some people would come back and bring, most people were not allowed to travel, right? But occasionally, like, somebody who was in high position somewhere, and like their friend would share with a friend, and we would get like either a magazine from America, or like somebody would bring blue jeans, or like Marlboro cigarettes, or any of those stuff. And so we knew that America like has, and the movies, of course, we loved American like cowboy movies and the Hollywood stuff. And so we knew that life in America is not as bad as the Soviets are portraying it is. And we could see, we didn't have much in terms of like, food and all of these other things. Like it's,
food.
It was, well, yeah.
They just sit there like, we didn't have a lot of, what do they call that stuff? Food. We didn't have that stuff, but it was great.
Well, what I mean is like diversity of food. That right. Here, I remember when I first went to a grocery store here, I saw all that abundance of food, especially like vegetables and fruits, and like tons of different yogurts. I've never seen yogurt before. I didn't think it was real, like especially apples. They were red, delicious. First, I thought that they were not real somehow. And then I thought it was all staged, because it was unreal to me that there was so much stuff and nobody was like trying to grab it and run away or something. So it took and nobody was like trying to steal anything. It was just there. It was just, was just there. So
Right.
it took me a while to figure out also how to choose things. And I wondered, like, when I realized it was all real, I was like, why do they need like so many different kinds of cereals or yogurt? And I'm like, how do you even decide like how to like what to buy? And of course, it didn't take me long. Right now, I'm like the pickiest person in terms of like what to eat. Like I quickly realized what I like, and now I understand why there are zillions of different brands. Because in America, like every individual has a choice, not only about how to vote, but also what to eat.
Right.
So it's
It's a fascinating concept. Shamika, what were you going to say?
Now, I was just wondering for Rebecca, after living both experiences, why do you think it is that people here in America, because I've even talked to some people, some Asian people who are like, you don't want this country to become communist, and they speak so passionately about it. Why do you think people here in America don't really take it seriously or understand how drastic the change would be and they welcome it? Do you think it's the media? Do you think it's we are lacking in education as far as teaching about other places? What do you think the issue is?
I think it's everything that you mentioned, Shamika. First, I want to say that I am also very passionate um, about speaking out against socialism. I've written a couple of opinion pieces, um, explaining what socialism really is, because I think it's glamorized here, especially by young people and by the academics. And most people who promote it, they've never lived under socialism or communism. And my advice to them is to actually go and live there. And I guarantee that they will run back to America within, in less than a year. So they glamorize it, say how everything is going to be free, healthcare, college, this and that. But when everything is free, nothing is really available, because what happens under socialism is the system simply does not produce enough goods and services because there's no motivation. Because when everybody is paid the same as we were, back in the Soviet Union, there's no motivation to create anything. And so only the ruling class has the first dibs on everything, and the rest of the people don't have access. And we've seen a preview of some of it during COVID. Remember when there were no, at least in the beginning, like no masks, there were shortages in sanitizer and toilet paper. And then I remember, Cuomo organized it to have like his family having these tests first and vaccinations and all of that. So to your point, I think people just simply don't understand what that means, and media obviously amplifies this lie that socialism is a great system. It's basically poverty, equal poverty for all, and total government control.
And you talk about the people who fight for it. Not only have they never lived under it, the other thing that's not said enough is that most of the loudest voices pushing for it, they are successful at the current system. So they're successful capitalists, right? So they've written books or created positions or jobs or businesses and made money, or they're journalists and they make all this money in the capitalist system. So it's not even like they've never lived under socialism, but they're poor Americans and they're struggling here and they're like, let's try something else. They're successful and they're doing it, Will.
Well, one interesting point Rebecca made, I was actually just about to jump in there, is that there was an elite under socialism. So, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I know every Eastern European friend of mine, when you bring that up, is like, yeah, no shit. foolish Yankee, of course. But I think that's something that a lot of Americans don't really know, at least in their bones. The idea is that these socialist systems, whether you're talking about Sweden, although I wouldn't call it a socialist country, but the old U.S.S.R, the Latin American countries, they're egalitarian. Everything is owned communally. People are living on kibbutzim. And that's not really accurate. I mean, in most socialist societies I'm familiar with, and obviously correct me at any point, but you have essentially the party, which doesn't consist of everybody. This is 10% of the population is cadre or old CCP or whatever they choose to call it. And those people are the ruling elite of the country that often live as well as people do in the West. So to me, I think a lot of the successful Americans that favor socialism tend to be in fields like the arts, academia, union labor, where they think the military to some extent, but where they feel they would still be elites in the socialist society and they would probably do better. So I guess the point I'm making with all that is, can you explain a little bit better how the elite works in a socialist country? Like, tell our young listeners that not everyone is going to be living on a farm making beautiful art. Actually, before that, two bad jokes. First, so you guys said that I was gonna make some communist jokes. I'll lead with the classic, dark humor is like food under communism. Not everyone gets it. But there's an even better joke that I saw recently. Did you guys see this thing on Twitter where young feminists talked about what they would do under communism?
Mm-mm.
No.
This is legitimately funny. Google feminists discuss communism. But all these people were talking about what they would do when the glorious revolution comes. They don't have to work in Starbucks or as sex workers, or one was a women's shoe salesman. She said she was tired of smelling feet all day. And they were talking about what would happen after the victory. Sex work could be even worse in that respect. But what's going to happen after the victory of the socialists? And people were listing the jobs they would do. Like one said they would just paint. Their role in the community would be to paint. Another person said they would make soap. And another person said, I would spend all day on my farm, getting laid, watching the animals walk around, hoeing the fields. And this Polish dude, who I know casually, jumped into the thread and said, quote, "Bitch, what do you mean your farm?" And I think that is probably the funniest response to anyone talking about communism ever. What do you mean your land, kulak? But anywho, can you break down how these systems work? What is the elite in a typical Eastern European style, for example, socialist society? How does that work?
You nailed it, Will. This is and the Polish dude is so correct.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, so there are two big classes. There's the elites, the Communist Party, or the haves,
Yeah.
and then the rest of us. And everybody had just a little bit, but but not much at all. And some of the examples that I'll give you an example. I mean, to the point, we didn't have, I don't know, everything. There was a shortage of everything. Toothpaste, toilet paper was not existent. Okay, forgive me for being gross here, but newspaper, Pravda, was the toilet paper. I am not even kidding you. Okay, so no pantyhose, no, I don't know, sanitary product. Nothing. People.
Can I interrupt you? So in the cases where the products were available but scarce, talk about what you had to do in order to get it.
So okay. So first of all, it's not like they were just basically not available. What Communist Party members and the elites, they had their own. You had to have. There was a special word for it. Blatt. Blatt meant connections, right? So if you have connections, you could buy the stuff either in a different store or these goods that never even got to the store. So it wasn't uncommon to come to to the grocery store and there would be 3 things on the shelves, let's say bread, milk, and some sausages, right? And that's on a good day. If you go to a department store, well, there were no department stores. They were just stores, the goods. people would queue up, line up even before knowing, like if there was something like boots, winter boots or something, right? You would get in line. When you see a line of people, you would stand in line even before you knew what the line was for, okay? By the time you got to your turn, like let's say you stood in line for 2 hours, right? And whatever it is that they were selling, like boots or whatever, your size wasn't available. You would get a different size, either to wear like a bigger size if you had to wear it with extra socks, or you would get it like to give it to a family member, whatever. Or sometimes by the time you get to your turn, nothing was available. So that's really, and the ruling class obviously had everything, right? Because they had even different stores. They went to different hospitals, the Communist Party, right? As I wrote in my opinion pieces, my teeth were drilled without Novocaine. It's torture, because it wasn't available, because everybody who has access to anything, they have this stuff, they trade this stuff with others for something. So if you're a dentist, obviously you want your daughter to have a painless, teeth drilling, and not you. It's and everything. So when they say free healthcare, it's dangerous healthcare, okay? Because it's just atrocious. But to your point, may I just tell, it's not even a joke. It's true, because you will mentioned how this Polish dude said, "What do you mean farm? Like you're not gonna have your own farm, right?" So the notion of personal property, private property, did not exist, right? Because everything was owned by the state, right? So my father, who is now in America, he's lived in America for already 17 years, right? But he still has not, he still has not abandoned this Russian mentality. First, he still hoards stuff, right? We would go to a grocery store and he would ask me to buy 3 gallons of milk instead of 1. And I say, "Why, Dad?" And he said, "Well, just in case, I said, "You don't need to. It's going to be there. You can come next week." Or he would hoard shampoo. Seriously, right? But the funny thing that happened before, my husband is American born, right? So my dad came to live with us, and one day he cut out azaleas in our yard that my husband loved. And my husband was so mad at him, and it was like, "Why did you do that? It's my private property." And my dad scratched my head. "What do you mean private property? You're married to my daughter. I live here too. This is my house too." They were really talking past it. My dad couldn't conceive that. What does it mean private property? We all live here, right? Like you were saying, they're living in communes, which is what some of us did. We lived with other families in the apartment with other families, and you shared kitchen and bathroom and all of that stuff. So sorry for going on for.
Look at Shamika. You okay over there, Shamika?
Yeah, I'm just thinking no, I could not live like that. It would
You don't
be
want
just
this?
a. I'm sorry.
You don't. I mean, you black, so you still had it worse
Right.
than her.
Obviously, I'm I need to tell my black friends, listen, this is not what you want. We got it good here.
Oh, we
But it'd
have
be
it
equal though. But they
awesome.
want equality, so everyone's treated equally bad. So we bring the equality down.
Exactly.
So what if the white man would tell your friends that the white man would be treated just as bad as them, but they're still treated bad? Would they sell? Would they buy it?
Yeah, some of them would be like, yes, they would cut off their
About time
nose
they
and
got
spite
they
their
got
own
their
face.
comeuppance.
Well, this is
Yeah.
actually what's going on in the schools, right? So, I mean, in a lot of these highly integrated states like New York, the issue is that, and the black kids aren't even doing badly, but the issue is that, the school system's 40% black, the gifted program's only 27% or whatever it was black. So the solution is to get rid of the gifted program. It couldn't be that the black kids study a little less, or even that racism in the past affected where people live or something like that. It's that actually, I don't even know if they discount those explanations. They just say the gap itself indicates some kind of prejudice, and we can't have the whites winning this race. So we need to eliminate this system so that everyone can perform equally. But it's exactly
Have
what
no
Rebecca
race,
said.
right?
Everyone's going
The
to,
whites can't win the race if there's no race, Will.
yeah, but everyone's going to perform equally badly. Like all of the thousands of black kids and white kids that were in the advanced mathematics program or the gifted program are now just going to be back in regular ass school, which is going to hurt us as we try to compete with, for example, the Russians. So, I mean, this I think is the great temptation of socialism and of egalitarianism. And several of you guys have said this very eloquently. It's the idea that everyone will be equal, that will finally will smooth out the rough conflicts between, white and black and male and female and east and west and so on. Everyone will perform at the same level. But the only way to get people to do that is to make everyone fail. This is like the great never mentioned secret of all this. Like, you can't make everyone a genius, but if you offer enough bread and circuses and few enough books, you can make everyone an idiot. So that is where most egalitarian systems tend to go, I think.
Yep, I call it negative equality. Go ahead, Shamika.
Yeah, so since you brought up equality, what do you think about the United States military? Like, I've seen commercials of what's going on with Russia's military, where you see these strong men, they're getting prepared. But when you look at what's happening to our military here in America, we want to make sure, we have women and gays, and that is just all inclusive. And it looks to me, if we were to put the men that I see in the Russian commercials up against our military, we would lose. So, what do you think about how we are being so focused on inclusion now and not really, the toughest people or the, best people for the job?
So it's a concern, obviously, to me. I love U.S. military because I served, as a DIA intelligence officer, and DIA is the military counterpart to CIA. So we support the warfighter. So we have the best warfighting force in military history. However, this recent trend where they are now brainwashed, including in military academies and even in the Pentagon with Marxist, ideologies, is a concern. And that we're shifting focus from something that's, critically important, teaching the young officers how to win battles. We now, are trying to like equalize or diversify, or I don't know what the word is, the whole LGBT and now even transgender, all of these issues are not a priority, right? The priority is to be ready to protect the United States, to uphold, our freedom, national security, but most importantly, defend us from foreign adversaries like Russia and China, because they are certainly, gearing up. Both countries have declared in their doctrines, especially Russia, and long-term China, that they would like to weaken, if not defeat, the United States. And so, unfortunately, our capability has eroded. And we've seen that with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And when we couldn't even in 20 years, even having superior weaponry, we had to withdraw and abandon a lot of our capabilities at a very critical military base because we just simply are not good at strategy, because our attention, our focus is just on something completely extraneous, right? So, but with regard to Russia, obviously the Russians put their propaganda on TV. Yes, they put out those, in the Twitter feeds, like images of strong, military guys. Yes, of course, but they do have their problems. There's alcoholism and all these other things. But they train their military in order to be able to take on U.S. military, because the Russians have concluded that war between Russia and the U.S. is inevitable because our geopolitically we're on a collision course with them, because we're fighting over the control of the same territory, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and all those post-Soviet space countries.
Well, we got like 20 minutes left, and we got to sell some books. So, I mean, they can read the book because you write a lot about Russia. They can learn more about the madness that you went through growing up. But I want to get into Putin and intelligence and that kind of thing. But one last thing that I think is important that people will find interesting, because we think about, even though it's funny if you think about it, Will may have something to say about this. But as much as we fight about equality and race and gender and all this other stuff, and we got academics who seem to hate America, but we all, because this is where we're from and what we grew up with and what we've seen, we all still have this kind of, tunnel vision about the world. We're all like, we view things as Americans. So it was fascinating, at least to me. It made sense. I wasn't surprised, but it's fascinating to hear it when you talked about the Russian people, not Putin, as you, bridge that gap. Talked about their love of Russian people, not really patriotism, as Will mentioned earlier, but their pride and what they think about this stuff, and how you might come here and you'd be like, why don't they teach all the wonderful things that we've done? We've done some great things too. Why aren't they teaching that? And you read it and you're like, yeah, I knew that, but yes, that's true. No one really talks about that. So talk a bit about the pride of the Russian people and some of those things that you write about in the book.
So the Russians believe that they're an exceptional nation, just like Americans believe that America is exceptional. And some of it comes from the fact that they occupy the biggest country on earth, right? That is full of tremendous natural resources. And they have a very rich history and tremendous contributions to the world's culture. Just a couple of things to mention. Obviously, Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker, that I don't know if every American realizes that it's the Russians who brought the Nutcracker to the world. The Russians launched the very first human into space, Yuri Gagarin. The Mendeleev's table of chemical elements was invented by the Russian Mendeleev, and a lot of other things, and
talk about their views about the way they view World War II. That's always interesting too.
Yes, exactly. The World War II, the Russians call it the Great Patriotic War, because they defeated, the Nazis, and they believed that they bore the lion's share for the victory in that war, and they believed that they saved the world from fascism, right? And they kind of resent the West for not sort of given enough credit to Russia for that. So, yes, the Russians are very proud people. They are patriotic people, even though they do not support. So, during the Soviet Union, obviously there was antipathy towards the Communist Party, because the life was just so hard, and there was a lot of oppression and repressions. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, at first the 90s were very hard over there. I was already here, but my family was still there. When Putin came to power, he put Russia back on the map and made it like a great power. The Russians have a special word for it, держава. It means a great power. It means they want to be just like the United States in terms of its stature. And that's what Putin has brought to them. And to the surprise of American elites, Putin enjoys very high popularity, like especially, like his popularity is in the typically like between 60 and 80%, which is very high for Western society. And that is because he fights for Russian national interests and he stands up to the West, because the Russians always viewed themselves as separate from the West, not the Europeans and not Asian, but Eurasia. Eurasia is the part that Russia occupies. So yes, very, very proud people. And that's why I think the two governments are really clashing, because, both want to be sort of a great power. But the world views are very different between the Russians and Americans.
So you brought up Putin, so I mean, we can talk about the book now, Putin's Playbook, and you can talk about his plan. What is his plan? What is it that he wants to do outside of bringing the whole band back together?
Sure. So the book is called Putin's Playbook: Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. So it's very important to understand what the driving factors are for his behavior. And that's one of the reasons I wrote a book, because we have a lot of information that's coming like in the media, but it's incident reporting. It's like cyber attacks here, Russian military buildup along the Ukrainian border over there, but nobody really explains why Putin is acting out the way that he is. And the reason is that Russia perceives the United States as its security threat number one. Why? It's because the collapse of the Soviet Union is viewed by Putin and also by many Russian people as a tragedy, because it goes back to what Charles said. They're very proud people, and U.S.S.R. was an empire, if you will, right? And so because the United States has brought in the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia into NATO, and is also trying to democratize countries like Ukraine, Georgia, and other post-Soviet states, the Russians view it as a threat because they perceive the post-Soviet states as their security buffer, and they perceive that it's their sphere of influence, it's their backyard, and Putin has his own version of the Monroe Doctrine. He believes that area is off limits to the U.S. and NATO, and he basically said, what if we, Russia, deployed, forces into Cuba, into Venezuela, into all of these like U.S. Hemisphere. So, because he understands that regardless whether it's Republicans or the Democrats who are in charge, in the White House and of the country, the policy is the same. America is trying to democratize, bring democracy to post-Soviet space, just like we tried it, in my opinion, foolishly, in Afghanistan, Iraq. There are a lot of places that our elites just simply don't understand that democracy will never work, right? Same thing with Ukraine. Ukraine is an extremely corrupt country. It's, it has a lot of issues. And so Putin determined, because we're not going to back off, he wants to gradually weaken the country with these various 5 instruments that I described in the book. And election interference is just one of those things. Cyber attacks is another. And then additional, instruments, space, counter space, spies and disruptors, all the way to the military options. They don't want to invade, America, God forbid. They only prepare for war in the event that a conflict in Europe escalates into a full-blown shooting war. if, let's say, they want to take over Ukraine and we interfere, that's why he's preparing for war. All these other instruments, non-kinetic, non-military, he wants to use to destabilize our country from within, because he believes we are a threat and we will not stop trying to democratize his sphere of influence.
Okay. And Will, Shamika, you have any questions about our intelligence community, since she was a DIA officer, about how they're doing in the fight against Russia? Are they taking it seriously? You know, I remember, you know, I blame our lack of focus on Russia with the great king, our last king, Obama, because he made fun of Mitt Romney and said, when he mentioned Russia being an issue, remember he famously said the 1980s called and they want their foreign policy back. That made it uncool to talk about Russia for a while until Trump came
Yeah.
along. That's all they talked about. So what do you all think about that?
I mean, for me, first of all, it doesn't surprise me at all that Putin is popular. Again, I think in the USA, we often have the idea of what should be thought often comes from very atypical, soft people. It's this very specific intellectual class, almost everyone coastal, lower upper class, a few mostly useless varieties of advanced degree. If you spent time in the U.S. upper middle class, everyone went to one of 12 Ivy or Big Ten schools, so on down the line. And I think these are the people at, say, the Atlantic that kind of give the acceptable moral code to the 8 people that listen to them. I mean, I think if you look at Vladimir Putin as a world leader, speaking as a political scientist, but also just someone who's been a leader as a businessman, an athletic coach, so on, I mean, he's a strong, cocky, funny guy. He's hilarious. I mean, there was that conversation with one of our presidents, I think it was Bush, where this, you know, cowboyish American said, I looked into his soul and saw God. And Putin said something like, I do not have a soul, I am a Russian. And I'm not sure about God. And then he made a couple more jokes and he went off to get his vodka and do some interviews. I mean, so it doesn't surprise me at all that that guy is well liked. I mean, someone who's saying, you know, what is it? The taiga must belong to the Russian bear. Like, he has a very set idea of what he expects Russia to be. From the great northern force down to what he clearly considers all these tiny little countries that never should have broken away from the fatherland. The Chinese have a very similar view, by the way, of Taiwan and Hong Kong and the like. These are seen as sort of rebellious children. So it doesn't surprise me that people like Putin and Xi are popular at all. Our intelligence community is quite good. I mean, in all honesty, Rebekah, I mean, I read the book, good book. All our spies seem to be on point. The obvious weakness for us is that we're much easier to infiltrate than most other countries are. We're extraordinarily multicultural. We're extraordinarily multiracial. We're all about money. We speak the world's global business language. So it's much, much easier to get a Russian agent into the USA posing as an American white than it would be to get an American agent, 90% of whom would be white or black, into China. You know, so I mean, that's going to be much more difficult as a mission. I guess my question for Rebekah, who's the pro in this field, would be, what advice would you give the U.S. intelligence community when it comes to Russia and secondarily China? What should we look out for? Because all our enemies think in much longer terms than we do. Decades or centuries, not 4-year presidential election cycles. They don't have real elections in most of those places, but that's an adjunct to the question.
That's an advantage.
Yeah, but I mean, like, even in Russia, and Russia's, of course, a very civilized country, but I mean, it was Putin and who is it, Medvedev just flipped roles for 12 years or something like this, and nobody thought it was unusual at all. In China, I mean, they don't even pretend. I mean, they have a CCP Congress and everyone does a bit of log rolling and bunny hugging, and then they tell the people who the president will be. And for 20, 30 years, it's usually the same guy. But for Rebekah, what advice would you give us going up against varsity opponents of this kind?
And
Well,
as you answer that, can you add what you see happening right now in America that are true red flags that we are going down the wrong path?
in terms of national security or domestic situation?
Both for me.
Both
for me.
Okay,
yes.
Got it. So the first advice is to really develop expertise and competence in what we call a target, an intelligence target. Russia and China are highly complicated intelligence targets, very difficult to penetrate. And unfortunately, we lack understanding of their culture and knowledge of their language. For someone like me, it was extremely difficult to get into the intelligence community. It took me 7 years because of where I was born and raised. Most of the people in the community speak no foreign language and haven't been in their target country, okay? Because it's easier to recruit those people. And that's why we have a problem, even though we have the best, like I said, military, we do have tremendous intelligence capabilities, like in terms of technology, but we're lacking in understanding our adversaries, what motivates them. Because, for example, obviously, intelligence does not come in English, right? It comes in the original language. Something gets lost, first of all, it takes time to translate that. There's very small segment of the community that gets the stuff translated. A lot of the stuff can't be used because can you imagine translating, terabytes of data? And that is why we're in a mess in these countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, is because we can't build a strategy for these countries because we don't understand them, okay? So that's the very first thing that needs to happen. How do you resolve this? I don't know, because they haven't changed the rules on how to get in the intelligence community with somebody like me, because a sane person is not going to spend 7 years trying to get, someplace. That's what my husband told me. He said, you're insane. And I did that because after September 11th terrorist attacks, I was really, really, upset that my adopted homeland was attacked in this manner, and I wanted to serve. So what I see to Shamika's issue is that I see some of our national security elites, if you will, they still push the same policies that are based on not, on reality, but based on wishful thinking. What Charles mentioned before, President Obama, right? President Obama was trying to have a reset with Russians. In that regard, he was no different than anyone else. Every single president was trying to do the same, and so did Obama. Even though we had plenty of warnings that the Russians were not interested in that, and the Russians were presenting a threat to America. But so the same thing right now, you see President Biden granting Putin's opportunity to have these meetings to discuss something that is not achievable. The security guarantees ultimatum, if you will, that Putin presented to Biden is just simply not acceptable, right? And yet we keep discussing and talking and talking. We need to get real. We need to get real with these people and start real. It's very difficult to change Putin's decision calculus because he has already decided America is a threat. And instead of trying to rewire his brain, Putin's brain, we need to really prepare ourselves for any possibility, for any conflict scenario, and really have our eyes on target, whether it's Putin, Xi, the Iran, North Korea, and not get distracted by all these little things that Shamika was mentioning before, basically I forgot how you phrased it, Shamika, but in some of your other podcasts, I heard you say about how, things become sissified or something like that. All these little, I forgot how you said it. You said it so eloquently.
In a way that only Shamika could say it, is how she said it. So, but you telling me the recent talks with Putin and Biden didn't give you more confidence? You don't think everything's all solved now that Biden's on the case?
Are you being facetious?
Of course I am. I mean, I don't know. Am I? You tell
Well,
me. What do you think? How do you think that? Do you think? I'm saying this with a straight face. Do you think Biden can handle Putin in a one-on-one kind of a the wheel is Shamika? They're not in the hand. I can't even get out. But no, Biden. Seriously. So Biden's supposed to be having these talks with Putin. Putin literally has thousands of troops on the Ukrainian border. Are you saying that? Do you think that Biden's the man that can have a conversation with Putin and those troops go away?
they absolutely are not going to go away. Putin does not view President Biden as someone who, is going to stand up with him. And truthfully, during their last virtual tete-a-tete, President Biden pretty much promised Putin that America is not going to intervene militarily, even if Putin attacks Ukraine. Now, I don't believe we and our men and women in uniform should go to war with nuclear Russia over Ukraine.
Or our men who are women in uniform.
I think it's a bad idea because Ukraine is not part of our vital interests. Our territorial integrity, safety, security, and long-term survivability is in no way dependent on Ukraine. But it is very dangerous what we have set up, the precedent that we have set up with Russia by not responding to 20 years worth of cyber attacks. And really, as you said earlier, Charles, taking our eyes off the target while we were, doing our counterterrorism thing in Afghanistan and all these other places, all of a sudden, we can't stand up to him because he is already formed a certain opinion of what we do and, most importantly, what we won't do. And so we need someone strong whom Putin and Xi's going to respect. I mean, as you well said, earlier, these authoritarian leaders, they project certain power. And unfortunately, diplomacy that President Biden is trying to pursue is just not the language that Putin understands. In fact, one of the quotes that I used in my book from Putin is Putin said, weaponry and diplomacy works much better than diplomacy alone. So that's the mindset. So no, nothing is going to happen. In fact, what I'm concerned about is that Putin is going to strike Ukraine. I made an assessment, and that is why, the Russians submitted the proposal that they know is unachievable, because that proposal for security guarantees would append 72 years worth of our bipartisan foreign policy that basically envisions preventing Russia from dominating Eurasia. That's both parties agree on that policy, and it would not be possible for us to reverse that just because Putin is saying we should.
Right. So is there, we're coming up on the end here. Is there one last thing you want the American people to hear, to think about, or some action they can take that's, that's outside of the political and intelligence circles, or something that would make them, pick up the book?
Well, yes. The book will explain what is going on and why it is going on, both with regard to Putin's actions, whether it's Ukraine, Kazakhstan, or even, the Havana Syndrome. We didn't talk about that, but, the U.S. diplomats periodically get attacked with something that has been described as Havana Syndrome. It's like neurological illness and even potentially like brain damage, I have made the attribution that it's Russia, and I've written about that. Anyways, so the book explains that. It also explains what goes on domestically that is attributed to Russia, that we don't understand because the media and our corrupt upper echelons in the intelligence community completely like changed the narrative, with the election interference, right? We didn't touch upon this topic, but my book explains that back in 2016, the Russians did interfere in the election, but not to help elect Trump and harm Clinton. It's to divide our society, to disrupt the order, to foment unrest and discord, right? So that's the reason to pick up the book. And then the second thing, which may be even more important, that I want to tell my fellow Americans to please do not believe the academics about socialism. It's not what it is. It's total government control and equal poverty for all, and I will fight it with all I can, trying to expose it and write about it so that we do not choose that awful system. There's a reason why the immigrants, everybody in the world wants to come to America, right? If America was so bad and racist and like terrible, we would not have an issue in the border, right? Everybody trying to come. Nobody wants to go to Russia and all these China, all these, places. So capitalism it's not a perfect system, but it's the best system that's available out there.
All right. I would simplify that to saying this is what they should take away. If they don't want to stand in random queues of lines to get to the front and have nothing and have the store not have their size, don't go with socialism. And but thank you. It's been a great conversation. I apologize to the viewers that we never gave Will the memo, so he didn't put on red. But I wanted to give him the red, but he refused to do it because he didn't want to look like a Ruski. I could go either way. One of those is true. You decide which one. But she is Rebekah Koffler, author of Putin's Playbook, Russia's secret plan to defeat America. Rebekah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Will, Shamika. It's such an honor, a pleasure. I love your podcast.
Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to save. God bless the U.S.A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save because I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.